On July 10th, 2025, a shocking crime emerged from Gurugram, Haryana, that quickly became one of India's most discussed murder cases. She was making breakfast. That's it. That's all she was doing on the morning of July 10th, 2025. Standing in her kitchen, in her own home, in the city she had grown up in, making breakfast like any normal person on any normal Thursday morning. She was 25 years old. She had competed in international tennis tournaments. She had survived a serious injury that ended her playing career. She had rebuilt herself as a coach, helping younger players find the same sport that had once given her everything. She had a future. She had plans. She had dreams that had survived every setback life had thrown at her. And while she stood at that stove, with her back turned, her own father walked up behind her with a licensed revolver and fired 5 shots. 4 of them hit her, 3 in the back, 1 in the shoulder. She never even saw it coming. The one person in the world who was supposed to protect her from everything made absolutely sure of that. Her name was Radhika Yadav, and this is her story. I want to start at the very beginning because to understand how something this unimaginable happens, you have to understand who Radhika was. Not just as a victim, as a person. Radhika Yadav was born on the 23rd of March 2000 in Gurugram, Haryana. She grew up in a city that sits right on the edge of Delhi. A city of glass towers and corporate offices and wide roads, but also a city with very old ideas living inside very new buildings. From a young age, Radhika took to tennis. And I don't mean she played tennis casually on weekends. I mean she committed to it the way serious athletes commit to a sport. Completely, obsessively, with the kind of dedication that costs you your social life and your weekends and your childhood, but that also builds something in you that nothing else can. She competed at the state level and then at the national level. She played under the International Tennis Federation, 36 singles matches and 7 doubles matches on record. She achieved a career best ranking of 75 in the girls under 18 category. That is not a hobby. That is a legitimate sporting career. That is years of early mornings and muscle soreness and lost matches and the kind of mental toughness that most people never have to develop. Her father, Deepak Yadav, invested in her career heavily. By the time everything unraveled, he had put over 2.5 crore rupees, that's 2 crore 50 lakh rupees, into her training, her equipment, her tournaments. That is a number that should stop you for a second. That is an extraordinary amount of money, and it speaks to how seriously the family took Radhika's potential. And for a while, it looked like everything was going in the right direction. But sport has a way of being brutal on young bodies. About 2 years before her death, Radhika suffered a shoulder injury. A serious one. The kind that changes everything. She could no longer compete at the level she had been competing at. Her career as a professional player was, for all practical purposes, over. This is the moment in many athletes' stories where things fall apart entirely. The injury, the loss of identity, the collapse of everything they had been working toward. It breaks people, but Radhika didn't break. She adapted. She made a decision that a lot of former athletes make when they love a sport too much to walk away from it entirely. She became a coach. She started booking tennis courts across Gurugram. She found young players who wanted to learn. She began building a small but real coaching practice, not a massive academy, nothing corporate or institutional, just a woman who knew tennis deeply, sharing that knowledge with the next generation. Her last competitive singles appearance had been in March 2024. By the time she died, she had already moved fully into this new chapter of her career. Friends described her as ambitious and grounded, committed to the sport, the kind of person who shows up. One fellow tennis professional said after her death that she had the prettiest smile. That detail hit differently when it came in the middle of a murder investigation. This is who Radhika Yadav was. Not a statistic, not a symbol, a real woman with a real life and a real future that was still being built. Now let's talk about the family, because understanding the family environment is essential to understanding how this crime happened. The Yadav family was comfortable. That's the first thing you need to know. And it matters because it eliminates the most common explanations people reach for when they hear about domestic crimes. This was not a family fighting over money. This was not a household drowning in debt. Deepak Yadav was not financially desperate. The family owned properties in Gurugram. They had rental income. They had land. Deepak's son, Radhika's younger brother, had recently entered the real estate business, which was adding more income to an already stable family. They lived in Sushant Lok 2 in Sector 57 of Gurugram, an upscale residential neighborhood. This was a family that, from the outside, looked like it had made it. So when you ask what the real problem was, the answer is not money. The answer is something far more complicated and in many ways far more dangerous. The answer is control. According to Radhika's close friend, Himanshika Singh Rajput, herself a tennis professional who had known Radhika for nearly a decade. The home that Radhika grew up in was a deeply restrictive environment. Himanshika made these claims in a video she posted on Instagram 3 days after the murder, and her words were raw and specific and devastating. She said Radhika was shamed for wearing shorts, tennis shorts, the clothes that every tennis player in the world wears on the court. She was shamed for talking to boys. She was monitored even during video calls. Himanshika said that when Radhika called her, she sometimes had to appear on camera herself just to prove to Radhika's parents that their daughter was actually talking to a female friend and not someone they disapproved of. Think about what that means for a second. A 25-year-old woman, an adult, a professional athlete, someone who had competed in international tournaments, could not make a phone call without supervision. This was not a protected childhood. This was a grown woman being treated like a prisoner. And Radhika knew it. WhatsApp messages that investigators found between her and her coach, Ajay Yadav, revealed that she had been talking about wanting to leave home, about possibly moving abroad, about getting out from under restrictions that had been squeezing the life out of her for years. She was looking for an exit. She was planning. She was trying to find a way to live her life on her own terms. She just didn't know how little time she had left. Let me explain something about the psychology at work here, because I think this is one of the most important parts of the story. Deepak Yadav did not wake up one morning and decide to kill his daughter. That is not how these crimes happen. What happens instead is a long, slow, grinding process. A process that psychologists and criminologists have documented in domestic violence cases over and over again. It starts with frustration. Someone says something that stings, a comment, a joke, a sideways remark. It bothers you. You push it down, it comes back. You push it down again, then the frustration turns into resentment. You start associating that feeling of humiliation with a specific person or situation. In Deepak's case, the association was Radhika's independence, her coaching, her visibility, her refusal to simply stop. And then the resentment turns into obsession. The same thoughts circle and circle. The same humiliation replays. The same anger rises and falls and rises again. You start distorting reality around it. The person you fixated on stops being a full human being in your mind. They become the symbol of everything you hate about your situation, everything that has ever made you feel small. Investigators found that Deepak had been trying to force Radhika to give up her coaching for months. He had been trying to control her social media, her appearance, her movements, her entire existence. And every time she refused, gently, lovingly, trying to talk him around, what he heard was not a daughter asking for respect. What he heard was a rejection of his authority, a challenge to his control, more ammunition for the people who laughed at him. By the time July 10th arrived, Deepak Yadav had been living inside this obsessive, distorted thinking for a long time. Long enough for it to have become the only reality he recognized. And what investigators found next confirmed something even darker. This was not an act of sudden, uncontrolled rage. This was planned. Police investigators looked closely at the events of July 10th, 2025, and what they found was chilling. The pieces did not fit together the way an unplanned, spontaneous act of violence would fit together. They fit together the way something carefully thought out fits together. That morning, before the shooting, Deepak sent his son out of the house on an errand. He made sure Radhika's brother was away. He made sure there would be no one who could physically intervene. Only Radhika in the kitchen. Her mother, Manju, upstairs on the first floor, unaware of what was about to happen. She later told investigators she had been ill with a fever and was resting in her room. Deepak waited. He waited until the moment was exactly right, until his daughter's back was turned, until she was at her most vulnerable. And then he walked into the kitchen with his licensed revolver and fired. 5 times. 4 bullets found their mark. 3 entered her from behind in the back. 1 hit her shoulder. She was shot in the back while she was making breakfast. She was rushed to the hospital. She never came home. Deepak Yadav was arrested at the family residence within hours of the shooting. He did not resist. He did not run. He confessed immediately. And then he called his brother Vijay Yadav and he said something that I want you to sit with for a moment. He said, Main Kanya vad kar diya hai. I have committed Kanyavad. Kanyavad is the ancient Sanskrit term for the killing of a female child. It is a word that carries centuries of the worst of Indian history inside it. The practice of female infanticide, of families destroying girl children because they were seen as burdens, as liabilities, as threats to family honor. Deepak Yadav chose that word deliberately. He didn't say, I made a mistake or something happened. He used a precise, ancient, ideologically loaded term for what he had done. He knew exactly what category of act he had committed. And then he said he wanted to be hanged. The man who had invested 2.5 crore rupees in his daughter's dreams. The man she had called Papa. The man who was supposed to be her biggest protector. He was arrested. He was sent to 1 day of police custody on July 11th, followed by 14 days of judicial custody on July 12th. And then he stayed in judicial custody as the investigation unfolded. Manju Yadav, Radhika's mother, was investigated as a potential accessory but was later fully cleared by police. Investigators found no evidence that she had any knowledge of what Deepak planned to do that morning. Now, 3 days after the murder, a voice emerged that the internet would not soon forget. Himanshika Singh Rajput posted a video on Instagram. She was Radhika's best friend, she was also a tennis player, and she had known Radhika for nearly a decade. And in that video, she said things that were specific and damning and deeply personal. She said Radhika had been enduring 10 days of escalating pain before her death. 10 days during which her father had been making increasingly extreme demands, demanding she shut down her coaching practice entirely, demanding she stop going out, demanding she disappear. She said the murder was premeditated, that Deepak had been planning it for at least 3 days before July 10th. This was not a sudden outburst, Himanshika said. This was a calculated decision. She described in detail the environment Radhika had been living in, the shaming over clothes, the monitoring of phone calls, the constant criticism. Years of it, she said, not months, years. My best friend Radhika was murdered by her own father, she said. He shot her 5 times. 4 bullets hit her. He had made her life miserable for years with his controlling, constant criticism. In the end, he listened to so-called friends who were jealous of her success. She also pushed back against a specific narrative that had been building online. The idea that Radhika's social media presence had somehow provoked or contributed to her father's behavior. Himanshika's response to that was direct. Radhika's Instagram account was private. She had 69 followers. 69. This was not a girl building a public platform or seeking fame. This was a girl who could barely make a phone call without supervision. The idea that her social media was a relevant factor was, Himanshika argued, not only wrong but insulting. Gurugram police took a different position on Himanshika's statements. They announced on July 14th that the investigation was essentially closed, an open and shut case, they said, and that they would not be including the social media claims in the charge sheet. Their position was that the evidence they already had, the confession, the recovered weapon, the forensic reports, was more than sufficient to proceed. In a press statement, police spokesperson Sandeep Kumar said, "The accused has confessed. The murder weapon has been recovered. Forensic reports support our findings." Police had also investigated a music video called Kawan that Radhika had appeared in under LLF records in 2024. Online speculation had suggested this played a role in triggering Deepak's actions. Police ruled it out entirely. They investigated claims about a romantic relationship and possible inter-caste marriage disputes. They ruled those out too. Every alternative theory that social media generated was examined and dismissed. The conclusion was always the same. Deepak killed his daughter because community members taunted him about living off her earnings, and he chose to eliminate the source of that humiliation rather than confront his own insecurity. 3 months after the murder, the Gurugram Police's Sector 56 unit filed a charge sheet in the district court. Over 400 pages, 35 witnesses interviewed. The core finding stated plainly in the charge sheet: Deepak Yadav killed his daughter, Radhika Yadav, to preserve his honor. Weary of taunts, obsessed with reputation, unable to tolerate the existence of a daughter who was more visible, more respected, and more professionally active than he apparently wanted her to be. He decided that eliminating her was preferable to examining himself. The next hearing was scheduled for October 17th. Deepak's lawyer, Advocate Shambir Singh, stated that he had not yet received a copy of the charge sheet and would comment only after reviewing the documents. The judicial process continues. The outcome is not yet determined, but the facts of what happened on July 10th, 2025 are not in dispute. They never were. The man who did it confessed the same day. I want to talk about what happened to India when this story broke, because the national reaction tells you something important. The case went viral within hours, not because murders are rare in India. They aren't. Not because fathers harming daughters is unheard of. Tragically, it isn't. But because of the specific combination of elements in this case that force people to confront something they might otherwise have been able to look away from. Here was a middle-class family, a financially comfortable, upscale area family. Not a story you could file away under poverty or desperation or lack of education. Here was a successful young woman, a documented athlete with an ITF record, a coach building a career. Not a story you could file away under a woman who made bad choices. Here was a father who had spent 2.5 crore rupees on his daughter's future, who then destroyed that future with 5 bullets. The sheer contradiction of it was impossible to look away from. Hashtag justice for Radhika trended. Hashtag stop patriarchy. Hashtag women's safety. Tennis professionals from across the country posted tributes. Psychologists were interviewed on news channels. Women's rights organizations issued statements. Op-eds appeared in every major publication. People called it an honor killing, and that framing sparked its own debate. Honor killings in the traditional Indian context usually refer to families killing women who married outside their caste or religion. This wasn't that. There was no forbidden relationship, there was no intercaste marriage, but the underlying logic was identical. A man decided that a woman's choices were bringing him social humiliation. He decided that the solution was to end her life. He wrapped it in the language of honor. Kanyavad, he called it himself, and he acted on it. If that is not an honor killing, it is at minimum a killing rooted in exactly the same toxic ideology. The ideology that says a woman's existence is something a man has the right to control, that her independence is something he has the right to revoke, that her life ultimately belongs to him and not to her. I want to be very honest about something here. I want to talk about what is uncomfortable to talk about. Deepak Yadav was not a monster in the way that word is usually used. He was not a mysterious figure. He was not someone who came from nowhere and did something that no one could have predicted. He was a father who had spent enormous amounts of money on his daughter's career, who had, in some version of his own mind, sacrificed for her, who had taken those taunts so personally, so deeply, that he had convinced himself his honor was genuinely at stake. I'm not saying this to generate sympathy for him. There is no sympathy available for a man who shot his daughter in the back while she was making breakfast. I am saying it because the scariest thing about Deepak Yadav is not how different he is from other people. The scariest thing is how recognizable the pathway to what he did actually is. The idea that a daughter's independence reflects badly on her father. That is not a rare idea. It lives in countless households, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly. The idea that a man's worth is tied to his control over the women in his family. That is not an unusual idea. It is taught sometimes explicitly and sometimes in the silences and the assumptions of everyday life. What makes Deepak Yadav an extreme case is not the ideology, it's how far he took it. Most men who feel this kind of wounded pride do not pick up a gun. Most of them make life difficult for their daughters in other ways, through emotional manipulation, through financial control, through relentless criticism, through making the home a place their daughters eventually flee rather than return to. But the fuel is the same: the belief that her life is an extension of his reputation, the belief that her choices are his problem, the belief that her independence is his failure. That belief, scaled up to its most extreme conclusion, is what happened in Gurugram on July 10th, 2025. There is one more thing I want to talk about, and it's the question of what we owe the women who are living in versions of this situation right now. Not the extreme version, the everyday version, because Radhika did not die in a single moment. The murder happened in a moment, but the conditions that made it possible had been building for years. Years of shaming, years of monitoring, years of being told that her independence was a problem, years of making herself smaller, reasoning with someone who had stopped being reasonable, trying to navigate an environment that was designed to wear her down. She tried to leave. She talked to her friend about wanting to go abroad. She wrote to her coach about wanting to escape. She was planning. She was not passive. She was fighting in the quiet way that people fight when the person they need to fight is also the person they love. And I think that part of the story is the part that most people have already moved past. In the outrage and the hashtags and the op-eds, what can get lost is the specific texture of what Radhika's daily life must have been like. The weight of living under that kind of surveillance and judgment. The exhaustion of constantly having to manage someone else's ego at the expense of your own peace. The loneliness of having a private Instagram with 69 followers and a best friend you could only call when you could prove where you were going. That is a life lived in a cage, a comfortable, financially secure upscale area cage, but a cage nonetheless. And the tragedy is not only that it ended the way it did, the tragedy is also that it lasted as long as it did without anyone being able to stop it. Radhika Yadav was cremated on July 12, 2025. 2 days after she was shot, 2 days after she made breakfast for the last time. Himanshika attended the cremation. She said later that at the cremation, she heard from others that Deepak had been planning the murder for 3 days before he carried it out. The father was not at his daughter's cremation. He was in judicial custody. The tennis courts she used to book are still there. The young players she coached are still there. The sport she gave her life to is still there. Radhika is not. The charge sheet has been filed. The court proceedings are ongoing. Deepak Yadav's fate will be decided by the judicial process, and that process will take its time. But I want to end with something that is not about the legal outcome, because the legal outcome, whatever it is, will not bring Radhika back. It will not undo what happened. It will not repair the lives of everyone whose world was fractured on July 10th. What the legal outcome cannot do is answer the question that this case actually asks us. The question is not, what should happen to Deepak Yadav? The courts will answer that. The question is, what kind of homes are we building? Are we building homes where a daughter's success is something to celebrate or something to manage? Where her independence is a source of pride or a source of anxiety? Where her refusal to be controlled is met with conversation or with escalating attempts to break her? Are we raising boys who are taught that their worth is not tied to their dominance over the women around them? Or are we teaching them, in the small daily lessons of how we treat women in our own families, that a woman's autonomy is a problem to be solved? Are we creating communities where the taunts that broke Deepak Yadav would never be spoken? Where a man being supported by a successful daughter is seen as something to be proud of rather than ashamed of? Because those taunts had co authors, the people who made those comments, casually, maybe even laughingly. They did not pull the trigger, but they handed Deepak Yadav the narrative that he used to justify pulling it. We talk about domestic violence as though it happens in isolation, as though it is purely the product of one broken individual. But it doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in a social ecosystem, one that sometimes, without realizing it, provides the justifications and the vocabulary and the cultural permission for men to feel that their pride matters more than a woman's life. Changing that ecosystem is a long, slow, unglamorous project. It doesn't happen in a hashtag campaign. It happens in homes, in conversations, in the way we respond when we hear a man say something contemptuous about a daughter who earns more than him. It happens in the decisions we make about what we normalize and what we refuse to normalize. Radhika Yadav deserved a father who was proud of her. She deserved a home where she could make a phone call without being monitored. She deserved to coach tennis and build a career and plan her future without fearing the man who was supposed to love her most. She deserved to grow old. She was 25 years old, born on the 23rd of March 2000. She left her last singles match in March 2024. She was shot on July 10th, 2025. She had the prettiest smile, her fellow tennis professionals said. She told her father, "Have faith in me." And she was making breakfast when he took everything from her. Rest in peace, Radhika Yadav. You deserve so much more.